Hey class, today we're going to be doing a little more with watercolor. This past couple of weeks we've worked with some abstract expressionists, and we've worked on things like line and shape and color. What we're going to start to do next is to put some of those things together, and we're going to create forms. We're going to create the illusion of three dimensions in art. And so what we have to do is start kind of altering our color and being more intentional about how we place our line and paying attention to where light might hit a shape. And when we put those things together, we start to get form. So I'm going to just do a little bit of a demo here as we move into this next project. I'm going to ask you guys to do still life of just some basic geometric shapes. So what I'm going to do is kind of just walk you through kind of how to set this up, how to get started. For this first one, what we'll do is we'll start by just using one color, and that way it kind of simplifies the process for us. We've been practicing kind of working from dark to light with watercolors on some of these exercises, and so now we're going to actually put that to use. We'll just stick with one color to make it a little more approachable for this first project, and then we'll start to layer on different colors in some other projects, especially as we get into architecture here pretty soon. But this is our first step to working in three dimensions, and then we'll get into some more complex stuff from there. But we're going to start simple, build some basic skills, and then we'll move on. So if you'll look over kind of at the palette and the tools here, you'll see that I have two brushes. I have a flat brush. That's just a brush that's straight across the top. A lot of times I'll use a flat brush for watercolor, especially for applying washes, or if I know that I'm painting a lot of things that are going to have straight lines, this flat brush is going to be really useful for that. Also with watercolor, I'll usually use a round brush, and a round brush is just a brush that is round around the ferrule. That's this metal piece, but then it comes to a point. It has kind of a pointed tip, and that helps you get some detail, and that'll be good for working around some of these rounded areas where the flat brush might not feel natural. This will feel more natural for kind of doing some of this little detail stuff. So that's all I'm going to use, those two brushes, and then I've got one of your paint palettes here. You'll also see that I have 2 cups of water. One of these cups of water will be used to clean my brushes. That will be my dirty water. And one of these will be used to add water to thin down my paints when I want to get lighter. And that's just going to stay clean. So I'll have a clean cup of water and a cup that's going to get dirty as I work. So to start with, I'm just going to pick a color. I think I'm going to go with purple to start out. And what I want to do is I'm just going to use my flat brush because it's a little bigger and it will pick up more water. I'm going to use that flat brush to create a puddle inside my palette. And hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing here. I'm creating a puddle inside this palette of just clean water. Actually, probably what I'll do is go ahead and make a couple of puddles just to make this a little easier on myself. It's always important when working with watercolor to go ahead and pre-prepare your colors. If you pre-prepare your colors, then you're going to be able to work more quickly, which is a good thing to do in watercolor because when you want colors to be able to blend or soften their gradient, a lot of times the paint still needs to be wet. So if you're having to stop and make new colors and mix new colors, then your paint's drying out, and as it's drying, it's losing that ability for you to work with it. So you've got to keep your paints wet. Next thing I'm going to do is, actually I'm going to add a little more water to this one. I'm adding more water to this puddle here because I want it to be more watered down. I want this to be my first layer. That's going to be my preliminary wash. So my preliminary wash is going to be my lightest wash. So I'm just going to mix that up. If you think about it, kind of like whisking eggs, right? You want to put a little paint in there, and then you kind of want to whisk it around and get mixed in pretty good. I'm going to get a little more paint. Not a ton. I still want this layer to be really transparent and really light. So as I approach a watercolor painting, a lot of times what I want to do, and I'll show you the example that I'm working off of here. So I've already got the sketch out here, but I'm showing you this original photo as well. So on this original photo, you'll see that there are some areas of light and dark, right? So My dominant dark areas are going to be on this side. Hopefully the light's cooperating with me so you can see it. But this side of the background is really dark. This side of the background gets a little lighter. And then down in the shadow right below the sphere, where the sphere touches the table, that's going to be a really, really dark shadow as well. And then I also have areas that are very white. And so the left-hand side of the cylinder is very white. It's going to be probably the whitest part of my image, along with this white side of this cube. And then the outer edge of the sphere is also pretty white. I think it might have a little bit of color to it. It's not quite as solid a white as these two areas. But it's important to note those to begin with when you're painting, because anywhere in your painting that you want to end white, that you want to be your highlight, your whitest portion, you want to keep those parts of your paper dry. You don't want to get any water in this area, because this should be the lightest areas of your painting. And with watercolor, that just means that you're not going to add any color to it because there's not a white paint, as you can see here. We don't have a white to add. So instead, we have to just keep the paper dry in those areas. So you want to make note of that before you get started. So with that in mind, the areas that I don't want to paint are going to be probably this side of this sphere, generally speaking right now, this side of the cylinder, and then this side wrapping around the shadow, which I already painted on it. Oh no. Let's see, I'll wipe some of that off. This side of this cube. So I'm going to see if I can wipe that off of there real quick. Sometimes you can while it's still a little wet. Let's see if I make that purple disappear. There we go. We pretty much erased it. And so now I also know that I need to avoid painting in this spot for a little while until it dries all the way. Otherwise, if I paint, say, this shadow in, then it's going to bleed into that because it's already wet. So I need to avoid that. So what I'll do first is I'll start to paint some of these shadow areas. So I know that this side is a shadow, so I'm going to paint that. This side is a shadow. This side is a shadow. That's very obvious. But then also the top is a little bit darker than the white. And so I actually need to add a little color up at the top too. And the top of the cylinder is a little bit darker than the white on the side. So I need to treat that like a shadow right now too. So all of these first shadows are going to be really light. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to add a little more water to make sure I've got it light enough. I'm going to mix that paint and that pigment back in. And then I'm going to start with these shadow areas. So I'll just go here first, just for sake of having a beginning point. There's not a rhyme or reason. I'm just going here first because it kind of feels right now. And I want to keep dipping back in the water, because if I don't keep dipping back in the water, then it's not going to dry even, and I'm going to see all these little paint strokes. I don't want to see a lot of brushwork in a watercolor piece. All right, so I'm just working from this puddle, and I'm trying to work while it's still wet. Actually, what I probably should have done with this one, and I could still do it, just add water and treat it like a wet on wet wash, since this is my lightest wash anyway. It will get darker shortly, but we'll just treat it like wet on wet to begin with. I'm going to let that fade in there a little bit. And that's all we need. We just need a really light value. We'll make this darker as time goes, but for this first wash, we want it to be light. And so, with that being said, I kind of caught myself there doing it the wrong way. With this shape up here, again, we got a shadow. I'm just painting clean water in here. It's still clean because I haven't really cleaned my brush out yet. Pretty clean anyway. I'm just painting clean water in that area. And while that clean water, oops, let's get that little corner, is still wet, I'll go back into my puddle and I'll just let this paint kind of run through here. Then I'm doing less brush work, and my wash ends up being a little bit lighter, which gives me a little more wiggle room. It gives me a little more margin for error. With watercolor, you don't get a whole lot of margin for error throughout the process. So I've got a light wash here. for this shadow, light wash here for this shadow. I also need a light wash here for this shadow. So I'm going to do that next. Again, I'll go in the water and I'll just do a clean wash. And I feel it's starting to kind of get dry and scratchy, so I'm reloading the brush with water. You've got to do that when working with watercolor. You can't let it dry out. You can't really like stretch the paint out. If your brush is starting to dry out, then you need to reload it. You've got to work with the brush constantly filled with water. So I'm going to add a little more at the top because it might be trying to dry out on me up here, because that took me a second to do. So add a little more water, and then I'm going to get some of this puddle. I'm just going to add that puddle back in there. And we'll let it flow through here. If you see how loose this is and how much this is kind of floating around in that water, I might have got a little too much water in this section, but that'll be all right. It's just going to take it longer to dry, and it might start to create a little puddle. So something I can do to help with that is dry my brush, and you can see that that will actually pull a little bit of the paint back out. So we'll do that. All right. Then we've got to think about a couple things. With watercolor, you don't want to paint a wet area next to a wet area, especially if you intend for them to be different. Like you want this one to be darker than this one. You don't want to do that if they're both wet, because the darker one will bleed into the lighter one. So you've got to kind of pick your spots. If this side's still dry, I don't want to paint this side because they're touching. If this side's still dry, I don't want to paint over here or up here because they're still touching. So what I'm going to do is just test this spot that I painted at the very beginning, and it feels really dry. So I should be able to paint this shadow here, because that little spot I accidentally touched isn't wet anymore. So I should be able to paint this shadow and control this shadow. And for now, it would be okay if these two bleed together because I'm doing them both lightly anyway. So I'm going to go in with some water, and I'm going to create this shadow shape. I'm going to just keep dipping in my water. That's pretty good. I might just do this section for now to give that side a chance to dry. I could probably go ahead and do all of this, but just for sake of showing you like good technique to keep yourself from getting into trouble, I'll just do this part because it's not connected to anything else that's wet. So I'm going to get some paint on the brush, not too much because it's kind of a small area. And we'll just kind of let the water do most of the mixing and blending for us. Make sure I get it out to the edges. And there you go. So we've got kind of our main shadow on each shape. We've got our main shadows, our form shadows. Now there's a couple lighter ones on the top of the cube that we could do, and on the top of the sphere that we could do. And really there's kind of a lighter one just outside this dark one we did on the cylinder is what I meant to say. On the sphere, there's kind of a lighter one outside the darker one. So we'll see if this is dry enough to do this one yet. If it's not, we might skip and just do the background. Let's see, so this feels pretty dry. It's still maybe a little bit damp, but I don't think the paint's gonna run in, so I'll do the top. And what I'm gonna have to be careful of is to note that the top is lighter than the side. So what I did for the side, I don't want to get quite that dark, so I probably need to use a little more water on the top. So I'm going to do that. First I'm going to just paint in with water, and then I'll add some extra water to that actual puddle of paint too. And actually this might work a little better with the flat brush, because this angle can be kind of tough to do. That flat side kind of makes it easier. So
Same thing over here. We'll just kind of go up to that line with the tip of the flat brush. And use the side of the flat brush to just catch this side. All right, now we've got a nice wash of water in here.
And then what I'm going to do is switch back. I'm going to really load this up with some extra water. Dip it in here. Get some extra water in that puddle. Just a little bit. And I'm going to just scrape out some of the paint so I don't get too much in the top. I just want a very little bit so that this top is lighter than the side. And then I'm going to dry off my brush a little bit. I'm going to pull a little of that paint back out like I did earlier. Just to make sure that it stays lighter, because it's kind of trying to puddle up in a couple little spots. I don't want all the pigment to go into that puddle and look darker than it should. All right, so I've got the top of that. Is clearly lighter than the side of it already. I'm going to do the same thing up here. I'm going to touch this. This is dry. So I'm going to do the same thing up here. Get some clean water. For this one, it's a rounded edge, so I don't want that flat brush. I'll use the round brush with the pointed tip. I'm just going to paint water in there. And again, this one's a small area, so I don't want to put much paint in this one. But I do want to put plenty of water so that whatever paint I do put in gets nice and thinned down. So I'm going to get a little extra water back in this paint again. There we go. A little bit of paint. I'm going to scrape some of my paint out. And let's just put a little dot in there. That looks kind of like more than I intended. We'll spread it out and see how it looks. It's pretty light. I'm going to try to pull a little out by drying my brush and then just kind of scraping that dry brush across there. And it kind of erases it. Hopefully you can see the difference there. I'll find out when I check the video later. But yeah, that should be good. So you get a little lighter at the top. You get a little lighter at the top. And then we have a couple cast shadows. So this is a cast shadow. So these are your form shadows, the shadows that are actually on the shapes themselves. Then the shapes cast shadows onto the ground, right? And that's what these are here. And those shadows a lot of times are darker because they're blocking the shape itself is blocking out the light. So I'm going to go into these. This feels dry on this side, so I'm going to go ahead and do this cast shadow. I'm not sure if that one is yet. This one had a little more water in it, so I'll give it a minute while I do this one. So again, clean water. And I'm going to go with the angle of the line that I drew. And just fill this with clean water for now. And then again, kind of use the side of the brush. I'm not even pressing down. I'm barely letting the brush touch the paper. I'm just filling out with water. And now that water is already there, all I really have to do is dip the brush in and press it down, and that water will kind of run all through that area now. This one can be a little darker, so I'm not as worried about how much paint I pick up. So I'm just going to go straight in. I'm going to use my flat brush because this area is pretty good for a flat brush. And I'm going to add my paint to it. And I'm just going to use my brush to kind of guide the paint around. I'm not going to force it in. I'm going to kind of coax it into the water. But mostly I'm letting the water do the work. You can see where it's kind of pooling up right here. What I'll do a lot of times if I have paint pooling is I'll use a brush and I'll kind of like create a little river coming off of there that I can pull some of that extra paint off of. And that way, that washes even and it's not kind of all over the place and really dark in one spot and really light in another. So you can see that kind of helped with some of that.
And I'm going to pull some down here. It's not quite going up to the edge of this line here. All right, so that's kind of my process with these. I'm just doing a preliminary wash. Everything should be light on this first wash. Let's see, this is still not dry, and so I still really can't paint next to this yet, which kind of means I just have to wait. So what I could do while I'm waiting for that, let's see if the top is dry. The top is dry, so I think everything else is dry. So I could go ahead and start to paint this background. You can see that this background is darker, and so I don't have to worry as much if the wash is really, really light. It's also darker on the left than the right, so I'll probably start with paint on the right. And then as I work my way over, I'll start to add some extra water to it. So we'll go with that. And since it's darker, I don't necessarily have to worry about doing a wet wash first, but I think I will. And the reason being that it's going to help this go on more evenly. If I don't put down a coat of clean water first, then as I'm painting on this side and I work my way over, as I'm working my way over, this is drying out and it starts to look streaky. So I don't want it to look streaky. Uh-oh, I made a boo-boo. I put my dirty brush into the clean water, so I guess this is now my dirty water and this one looks cleaner. So we'll make that adjustment. And let me move this cup. So what I'm going to do is just put down some clean water. That's the clean water now. So this goes pretty quick. When you start working around the shapes, it slows you down a little bit. But right now I'm just going to do these big areas. And I can get around there, I think, pretty quickly without it drying up on me. But what's probably going to start to happen is this water that I've already put down will start to dry out. So I've got to go ahead and get some paint down before that happens. I'll do another quick pass around the cylinder. And then clean water up top here. I think I can get all that before it dries. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start putting paint down now. I'm just going to get a lot of paint because this is a big area. Again, it's darker on this side, so I'm not really worried how much paint I get on this side. I'm going to have to go back and make this side darker anyway. This would be one of those times where if I wasn't filming this and trying to keep everything still, I could just pick up the paper or the board and kind of move the paint around. I wouldn't have to normally do this with the brush. I could let the water move it around. And then I might do that a little bit. I just hope things don't get out of focus when I do. So I'm just going to let that kind of flow and even out. And you can see it kind of made its own little stream. That's fine. I'll clean that off later. That kind of evened out some of the paint here. So then we'll start to add some more over here. You can see it's still wet, so it's still blending well. Things aren't looking streaky. You don't see brush strokes. That's kind of what I'm looking for. Now I'm going to go back and add more clean water because I didn't get all the way around the page. So I'm going to try to do that. And this side is lighter, so we could just let all of this paint kind of bleed over this way and lighten it up. And now I can't tell which one's my clean water and which one's my dirty water anymore. Oh no. It's a good thing I'm only using one color though, so it won't matter. It won't affect me that much. It would affect me if I was mixing colors. But we're really not for this project, so. All right. All right, so I'm going to add a little more paint, just maybe across the top here. And then again, I'll let the board and I'll let the paper move the paint around. And it looks like I've got a spot where the paint's not going, so it must have dried out on me. So I'm kind of watching for stuff like that. All right. And that gives me a pretty good preliminary wash. Another thing I might do is the foreground, if it's dry enough to do that. The table is what I mean by the foreground that these things are sitting on. But this is actually still wet, like this little part of the sphere. I'm not sure if it shows up on the camera up above me here. But it's got some glossiness to it, so it's still wet. So if I were to paint here, it would probably bleed in together. And probably in here it would bleed in together. I could paint this part, I think. No, this is still wet too. So really, this is one of those points with watercolor where I've got to be patient. But for now, we can call this the preliminary wash. And then in the next video, I'll show you how to start layering shadows. So this would be your first wash for now, because it's all I can do. I can't paint around here. I can't paint in here. All of that would bleed into other areas I don't want it in. So for now, that's my first wash with watercolor. You've gotta work fast so things don't dry out, but then you have to be patient and let things dry out between layers. So it's kind of a balancing act. So this will be your preliminary wash. This is what I want us to start with these geometric shapes, with this first kind of still life, simple still life. Just create your preliminary wash for now, and then I'll create another video to show you guys how to start building those shadows and to make these really start to look three-dimensional. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in class.